Most people don't realize it, but we've been trained to fear the one experience that could liberate us the most. Not pain, not failure, not even loneliness. What we fear the most, consciously or not, is death. We don't talk about it. We don't prepare for it. We pretend it doesn't exist until it's standing at our doorstep. And even then, we call it something else. A passing, a loss, a tragedy. We cover it with flowers and white sheets, with empty euphemisms and hollow rituals. We bury it beneath the weight of denial, and then we wonder why life feels so shallow, so fleeting, so disconnected. But what if the way we relate to death is exactly what's keeping us from truly living? That's not a metaphor. That's not a poetic musing. That's a spiritual truth that's been echoed through the wisdom of ancient traditions for thousands of years. And nowhere is it more direct, more precise, or more transformative than in the teachings found in a book that most people have never read, and even fewer understand. A sacred scroll, mysterious, precise, and, for some, forbidden. In the Tibetan tradition, there is no such thing as dying in one moment. Death is not a single breath. It is a process, a journey, a deeply spiritual unfolding that continues long after the body falls still. And those who know how to walk that path consciously, those who are prepared, can experience something most people never even imagine: a peaceful, aware, and even liberating transition into what comes next. But let's be honest, you weren't taught this. No one told you how to die. No one told you what the soul goes through after the heart stops. You weren't taught about the veils that lift, the mirrors that appear, the choices that remain. Instead, you were taught to run, to distract yourself, to cling, to pretend you had time. And in that pretending, we lose the very thing that gives life its meaning, the presence of impermanence. This video is not here to comfort you with platitudes, and it's not here to scare you. It's here to awaken something ancient inside you, something you've always known but couldn't name, something buried beneath the noise of modern life, a truth that once remembered changes everything. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a concept known as the bardo. Most people think the bardo is only what happens after death, but that's not quite true. The bardo means in-between state. And yes, there is a bardo after death, but there is also a bardo while living. You are in a bardo every time something ends, every time something begins, every time you are no longer who you were but not yet who you will become. When a relationship ends, when a chapter closes, when you move, when you awaken, when you fall apart, when you heal, these are all bardos. And if you pay attention to them while you're alive, you begin to understand the real bardo, the one after death, not as something foreign or terrifying, but as something familiar. The Tibetan masters say there are 6 bardos, but the one we'll focus on in this journey is the bardo of dying and the bardo of becoming. The space between your last breath and your next incarnation. The first 49 days after death. These days are not just symbolic, they are mapped, documented, described with a clarity and precision that would shock most people who assume death is just darkness or oblivion. The soul doesn't just vanish. It enters a transition, one that mirrors the state of your mind, your emotions, your attachments, and your karma. You're not punished. You're not judged by some cosmic authority. Instead, you face yourself. Your consciousness projects visions, forms, sounds, some beautiful, some terrifying, but all of them reflections of your own inner state. And in those moments, if you've trained your mind, if you've cultivated presence, if you've come to understand the illusion of ego, then you can recognize those projections for what they are. And that recognition is the key to liberation. This is what makes the Tibetan view of death so radically different and so powerfully liberating. You're not helpless. You're not at the mercy of randomness. You're on a path, and that path can be walked with awareness. But here's where it gets even more interesting. You don't need to wait until you're dying to start this journey. In fact, if you wait until your final breath to learn how to die, it's already too late. That's why the true purpose of this teaching is not death itself, it's life. To study death is to study the nature of reality, to understand what we truly are beneath the name, the identity, the memories, the flesh. Because everything we believe we are will dissolve. Every story we've clung to will be stripped away, and what remains is truth. What if you could face that truth now? Not in theory, not as a belief, but as a lived experience? Imagine how differently you would live if you were no longer afraid to die. Imagine how deeply you would love, how fully you would listen, how quickly you would forgive, how clearly you would know what really matters. That's what the Book of the Dead was meant to do. That's what the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying makes accessible to modern seekers. Not a doctrine, not a belief system, but a set of precise, powerful, and deeply sacred instructions for the liberation of the soul. And it begins with something most people avoid: awareness of death, not as a morbid obsession, but as the doorway to awakening. Because here's the paradox: those who deny death remain enslaved by it, but those who face it become free. This is not spiritual poetry. This is ancient technology, a method for training your consciousness so that when the moment comes, you recognize the path. You know what's happening. You are not pulled by fear, by clinging, by confusion. Instead, you move through the stages with awareness, with clarity, with lightness, and maybe, if the heart is ready, with joy. You are not just a body. You are not even just a mind. You are a continuum of consciousness, and that consciousness does not begin with birth, nor end with death. It flows. It transforms, it remembers, and if you choose, you can begin to remember now. This is the journey we'll take in this video. A journey into the 49 sacred days after death. A journey through the bardos. A journey not of superstition or blind belief, but of deeply rooted wisdom. What happens after you die is not random. It's not chaos. It's not a void. It's a map. And the more clearly you understand the terrain, the more gracefully you can travel it. So breathe deeply. Set aside everything you think you know, and enter the space between worlds, because what you're about to discover is something your soul has always known. Most people imagine death as a doorway you either walk through or don't. They think of it as a single threshold. Binary, final, absolute. One moment you're here, the next you're gone. But that image, while familiar, is deeply incomplete. Because in the Tibetan tradition, death is not a moment. It is a long series of moments. It is a process, an unfolding, a sacred in-between state filled with choices, visions, and opportunities. It is not just about leaving the body. It is about navigating the terrain between one life and another, a terrain so real, so structured, that the ancients gave it a name. They called it the bardo, and once you begin to understand what the bardo truly is, your entire perception of reality begins to change. The word bardo literally means intermediate state, but don't let the simplicity of the term fool you. The bardo is not an empty waiting room. It is not some ethereal purgatory. It is one of the most dynamic, revealing, and spiritually charged spaces the soul can enter. There are many bardos, not just after death, but during life itself. And if you're listening to this now, you're in one of them. Because life, too, is a bardo, a transition between birth and death, a brief flash of awareness between two great unknowns. And within that flash, you are constantly passing through smaller bardos, moments of loss, of awakening, of transformation, of letting go. Each time your identity collapses, each time your reality changes, each time something ends and something else begins, you are in a bardo. And that is not something to fear, it is something to master. Because when you become aware of the bardos while alive, you train your soul to recognize them when it matters most. In that fragile space after death, when everything depends on your clarity. According to Tibetan teachings, there are 6 main bardos. The bardo of this life, the bardo of dreaming, the bardo of meditation, the bardo of dying, the bardo of the moment of death, and the bardo of becoming, the one that leads to rebirth. Each of these stages represents a threshold of awareness, a shift in how we experience consciousness, and each one offers a mirror, not of the world, but of ourselves. But let us now focus on the bardos directly connected to death, because that is where the mystery deepens. That is where the map becomes both beautiful and urgent. The bardo of dying begins when the body starts to shut down, not just biologically, but energetically. The ancient texts describe this as a process of elemental dissolution. Earth dissolves into water, water dissolves into fire, fire dissolves into air, air dissolves into space, Each step is accompanied by internal visions, sensations, shifts in consciousness. And if the person is prepared, aware, and trained, they will recognize what is happening. They will not panic. They will not cling. They will allow the process to unfold. Then comes the bardo of the moment of death. This is where the deepest visions arise. Flashes of light, sounds, forms of deities, energies, symbols. Some terrifying, some blissful, but all of them projections of the mind. If the soul recognizes these visions as its own creation, it can attain liberation. It can dissolve into the pure light of awareness. It can escape the cycle of rebirth entirely. But if the soul clings, fears, or becomes confused, it continues. It moves into the next bardo, the bardo of becoming. This is the stage that lasts up to 49 days, the stage in which the soul begins to prepare for its next incarnation. It reflects. It experiences karmic echoes. It is drawn, not randomly, but magnetically, toward a new womb, a new form, a new life. During this time, the soul is highly sensitive. It is receptive. It is open. It can be helped. It can be guided. That is why prayers and rituals performed for the dead within 49 days are not symbolic. They are powerful acts of real assistance. But here's the key. Everything that happens in these bardos is shaped by the state of your mind, by your attachments, by your fears, by your ability to recognize the illusion. And that recognition is not something that magically appears when you die. It is something that must be cultivated while you are alive. That is the purpose of spiritual practice. Not just to find peace, not just to be calm or centered, but to prepare for the greatest moment of transition you will ever face. To die consciously is the highest form of spiritual mastery, and that begins by understanding what the bardo really is. It is not punishment. It is not test. It is opportunity. It is grace. It is the space where the veil thins and the soul is closest to truth. And if you learn to walk through it with awareness, you become something rare. You become free. Now imagine this. You die today, and in that first moment, you wake up into the bardo. You see visions. You feel waves of emotion. You begin to move through a space that responds instantly to your mind. What would you do? Would you know what's happening? Would you cling? Would you panic? Or would you remember this moment, this teaching, and realize, I am not the form. I am not the fear. I am not the voice or the memory. I am the awareness behind it all. That is what the Book of the Dead trains you to remember. That is what Tibetan masters dedicate their entire lives to preparing for, not because they are obsessed with death, but because they understand that how you die determines how you are reborn, that what happens in the bardo is not random. It is a continuation of everything you carry. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is not just a guide to the afterlife. It is a mirror, a map, a sacred script meant to be heard. Yes, heard, by the soul after death, because the soul can still listen. It can still receive guidance. It can still awaken. And perhaps most importantly, you don't need to wait until you are dead to receive this message. You can receive it now. You can begin walking through the bardos of your own life with more awareness, more presence, more clarity. So the next time you find yourself between two things, between a chapter that has ended and one that hasn't begun, between an identity that dissolved and a new one that hasn't formed, stop, breathe, feel the space you are in. That is the bardo. And if you can learn to meet it with open eyes, you are already preparing for the most sacred journey of your soul. Most people think they will have time. Time to say goodbye. Time to prepare. Time to figure it out when the moment comes. But the truth is, death rarely waits for permission. It doesn't follow our plans, respect our schedules, or arrive according to our expectations. It arrives like a tide that cannot be held back, quietly for some, violently for others, but always inevitably. And when it does, what matters most is not what you've accomplished, not what you've earned or owned, but in how aware you are in that final breath, because in that moment, everything collapses, except consciousness, and the quality of that consciousness shapes what comes next. You see, to the Tibetan masters, dying is not simply the body shutting down. It is a sacred passage, an opportunity, unlike any other. A door that, if passed through consciously, can lead to liberation. But if passed through unconsciously, clinging, confused, afraid, it pulls us into another cycle, another form, another life, shaped by the same karmic patterns we've carried for lifetimes. And that's why dying consciously isn't just a spiritual aspiration. It's a training, a practice, a preparation that begins now, in life, long before the final breath. So let us explore what actually happens in the moment of death, and how we can meet it with awareness. When the body begins to die, the process is not abrupt. It unfolds in primer stages, described with astonishing detail in the Tibetan teachings. This process is called the dissolution of the elements, and it mirrors the structure of both the physical world and the inner self. It begins with the earth element, dissolving into the water element. At this stage, the body begins to lose strength, the limbs feel heavy, the flesh softens. There may be a sense of sinking, of being pulled downward. The person may feel disconnected from the solidity of the world. Then, water dissolves into fire, fluids dry, the mouth and throat become parched. There may be heat flashes, disorientation. The person feels their inner vitality draining. Fire dissolves into air, the body cools. The breath becomes shallow, irregular. The inner warmth that once animated the body begins to fade. Finally, air dissolves into space. Breathing stops. Stillness descends. And yet, this is not the end. Because behind all of this, consciousness remains. Watching, experiencing, transitioning. Now something remarkable begins. The dissolution of the inner elements. These are the subtle aspects of mind and energy. Thoughts, visions, feelings, all begin to shift and collapse, revealing what lies beneath. There is a sequence of inner visions that occur at this stage, sometimes called the inner luminosities. First a whiteness like moonlight, then a redness like sunlight at dusk, then a darkness like an endless night, and finally, for those who are ready, a clear light, a radiant presence beyond duality. This is the nature of mind itself, pure awareness, limitless, formless, beyond time. For most people, this moment passes unnoticed. They are unconscious, caught in fear, confusion, grasping. But for the trained mind, the meditator, the practitioner, this moment is the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. It is the moment to recognize the light, to merge with it, to become it. And this is the essence of dying consciously. It is not about resisting death. It is not about holding on. It is about meeting the moment with open awareness, with deep surrender, and with the clarity to see through illusion. Imagine this. You are lying in your final moments. Your body is heavy. The room is dim. Loved ones whisper around you. But inside you are calm. You feel the elements dissolving. You know the stages. You have rehearsed them not in theory, but in practice. You recognize the white light, the red light, the blackness. And when the clear light comes, you are not afraid. You are not surprised. You are ready. This is not a fantasy. This is the goal of the entire Tibetan path, to be so familiar with the nature of mind that, in the moment of death, you are not lost. You are awake. But how does one prepare for such a moment? The answer is simple, though not easy. You practice dying every day. You die to your attachments. You die to your thoughts. You die to your need for control, your grasping for outcomes, your identification with form. You sit in silence and watch the mind dissolve. You watch emotions arise and pass. You watch the breath come and go, and slowly you begin to realize that none of it is you. You are not the anger, not the sadness, not the joy, not even the body. You are the awareness behind it all, and that awareness does not die. Every deep meditation is a rehearsal. Every moment of surrender, of letting go, is a small death, and each one prepares you for the great death, the one at the end of this form. This is why the Tibetan masters say, if you want to know how someone will die, look at how they live. If their life is filled with grasping, distraction, and avoidance, death will reflect that. If their life is filled with mindfulness, devotion, and practice, death becomes a teacher, not a threat. And here's the most profound part. The moment of death, for the conscious soul, is not terrifying. It is liberating. It is the moment you've been waiting for. The moment the illusion drops and the truth reveals itself. The ego dissolves. The stories fade. What remains is presence. You don't bring your name. You don't bring your memories. You don't bring your bank account or your achievements. You bring your calm state of mind. You bring your clarity. You bring the quality of your awareness. That is all, and that is enough, if you've cultivated it. So ask yourself now, not later, not someday, am I living in a way that prepares me to die? Because death is not just a future event. It is already here, moving with you, watching you, waiting not to punish you, but to awaken you. When you meet it consciously, it becomes your initiation. When you resist it, it becomes your prison. So let this be your practice. To live every day as if it matters. To love as if you won't get another chance. To sit in silence until you recognize the witness inside you. To surrender to life so deeply that when death comes, you already know the way. You will leave behind your body. You will leave behind your identity. But you do not leave behind your awareness. And if that awareness is awake, truly awake, then death is not the end. It is the return to light, the return to truth, the return to who you've always been. There are few things in life more intimate, more humbling, more soul-shaking than being present while someone dies. To sit by their side, to watch their breath slow, to see the familiar light in their eyes begin to fade. It is a moment that strips you of pretense, of distraction, of anything that isn't real. In that moment, only truth remains. And most of us, when faced with this kind of truth, freeze. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to act. We don't know how to be with the mystery, because we were never taught. We were taught how to comfort, how to distract, how to entertain, but we were never taught how to simply sit in silence with someone who is leaving this world. But the Tibetan teachings are clear. Being present with someone as they die is one of the most sacred acts you can offer another soul, not just emotionally, not just as support, but as a spiritual gift that can alter the journey of their soul beyond this life. And that presence, if given with love, with awareness, and with deep compassion, becomes a kind of light, a light that helps guide the soul through the in-between, a light that reminds them they are not alone, that even in the great unknown, there is still connection. But to offer that gift, you must first become comfortable with the mystery. You must become comfortable with your own silence, with your own powerlessness, with the reality that you cannot fix what is unfolding. You can only be with it, fully, honestly, and with your whole heart. So what does it mean to help someone die? It doesn't mean giving them answers. It doesn't mean making them feel better. It means becoming a mirror of stillness, a calm presence in the storm, a steady rhythm of breath when theirs begins to falter. It means listening without trying to solve. It means holding their hand when words no longer matter. It means letting go of the need to say the right thing, and instead becoming a space in which they can simply be. There may be moments when they are afraid. There may be moments when they are confused, agitated, or lost in memories. There may be times when they say things that don't make sense, or they ask to go home, even if they're already in bed, or they talk to someone invisible, or reach for something you cannot see. Let them. This is the mind beginning to shift dimensions. This is the soul sensing the veil beginning to thin. This is the in-between beginning to open. The Tibetan tradition recognizes this space as incredibly potent, not just for the one who is dying, but for those around them. Because the consciousness of the dying person becomes extremely sensitive. They feel everything, even if they can no longer speak, even if they can no longer open their eyes. They feel your fear. They feel your peace. They feel your presence. And that presence matters more than you can possibly imagine. If you are anxious, scattered, resisting what's happening, that vibration touches them. If you are centered, loving, surrendered, that vibration becomes a doorway. You don't need to be enlightened to help someone die well. You don't need to be a monk or a healer or a teacher. You simply need to be human, fully human, present, open, and kind. In Tibetan monasteries, there are entire rituals performed at the bedside of the dying. Mantras are whispered. Sacred texts are read aloud, not for the ears of the body but for the ears of the soul. Prayers are offered to remind the departing consciousness of its true nature, not to cling, not to fear, not to mistake the visions of the bardo as external threats, but to recognize them as reflections of their own mind. And though you may not have those rituals memorized, you can still offer something just as powerful: compassion. Compassion is not pity, it is not sadness. It is the quiet courage to walk with someone through the unknown without turning away. It is the willingness to sit in the fire of someone else's unraveling and to let your love be bigger than your fear. Sometimes the greatest support you can offer is your breath, to simply breathe slowly, consciously, with them, especially if they are struggling to breathe on their own. The nervous system of the dying person often entrains to those around them. If your breath is slow and grounded, theirs will begin to follow. If your energy is calm, theirs will begin to settle. And when the final breath comes, when the eyes no longer see, and the body becomes still, that's when your role becomes even more sacred. Because according to the Tibetan teachings, consciousness doesn't leave the body immediately. It hovers, it lingers, it adjusts. And during that time, usually up to 3 days, the soul is still present, still aware, still listening. This is why they recommend not touching or moving the body too quickly after death. Why they recommend keeping the environment peaceful, quiet, intentional. What is said in those hours can be heard by the soul. What is felt in the space can help guide them toward clarity or confusion. So speak gently, pray if you are called to, whisper truths, remind them of their light, of who they are, of what is waiting, and then let go. Let go of needing to hold them here. Let go of the attachment that wants to pull them back. Let go of your fear of being left behind. Because the more you let go, the more you allow their journey to unfold with grace. Helping someone die is not about doing. It is about being. Being love, being presence, being trust. And it is one of the greatest spiritual offerings a human being can give. Because in helping someone die well, you also begin to die well yourself. You begin to soften your own fear. You begin to understand what really matters. You begin to feel how thin the veil truly is, and how death, far from being an end, is simply the next step in the soul's eternal unfolding. So if you are ever given the gift, and yes, it is a gift, to sit with someone as they leave this world, do not panic. Do not run. Do not fill the silence with noise. Become the silence. Become the stillness. Become the light that reminds them of who they are. And in doing so, you become part of a sacred lineage. A lineage of those who guide not with words but with presence. Not with belief, but with love. Not with certainty, but with courage. Because in the end, no one dies alone. They die accompanied, either by fear or by love. And you have the power to be the difference. Let that be your offering. Let that be your prayer. Let that be your legacy. Most people are not afraid of death. They are afraid of disappearing. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid that everything they believed themselves to be will vanish, like a name whispered into the wind. They are afraid that all the memories, all the roles, all the identities, all the efforts to become someone were never real to begin with. But here's the secret most never discover. That fear is not a flaw. It's not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something breaks false and is trying to survive. Because what dies with the body is not you. It's the story of you. And most people spend their entire lives protecting that story, without ever asking who's telling it. From the moment we are born, we begin collecting pieces of identity like armor. We are given a name. We are told who we are. We absorb opinions, praise, blame. We build preferences, defenses, attachments. We cling to what we're good at, what we've lost, what we've feared, what we've been told to believe. And from that tangle of memory and emotion, we form a structure. We call that structure me, but that me is not fixed. It changes constantly. It expands and contracts depending on who we're with. It remembers selectively. It contradicts itself. It performs. And yet we treat it as sacred. We say, this is who I am. And anything that threatens that idea, even truth, is seen as an enemy. Now imagine what happens when death approaches. That story, so carefully constructed, so deeply defended, begins to unravel. Not just the physical body, but the narrative, the roles, the labels, the achievements, the unresolved wounds. Everything you've called I begins to slip through your fingers. And if you've spent your whole life believing that's all you are, then death feels like extinction, not because you're dying, but because the illusion is. This is why spiritual traditions for thousands of years have warned, if you don't die before you die, you will die when you die, because the self, the small, constructed identity, is not meant to be permanent. It was never designed to carry the weight of your eternity. It was meant to help you navigate this life, to learn, to relate, to experience, but not to define you. The Tibetan teachings go even further. They say that this I, the one who thinks, speaks, desires, fears, is a dream, a mirage. It arises in dependence upon causes and conditions, then dissolves when those conditions cease. It is empty, not in a negative way, but in a liberating way, empty of fixed nature, empty of solidity, empty of the burden of being permanent. But the ego doesn't like this. The ego feeds on form. It wants to matter. It wants to be seen. It wants to survive. And so it tells you, you must hold on. You must fight this. You must cling to what you know. But the soul whispers something different. It says, let go. Trust. You are not who you think you are. You are not your name. You are not your body. You are not your past. You are not your trauma. You are not your success. You are not your image. You are awareness itself. You are the open sky behind every passing cloud. You are the presence that was here before the story began, and will be here long after it ends. So the real question is not what happens when I die. The question is, who is the I that's asking? Most people never stop to examine this. They fear death because they've never looked at who or what they really are. They think they are the voice in their head, but that voice is just thought. And thought is not the thinker. Thought is just noise, conditioned by memory, emotion, reaction. So who is hearing that thought? Who is witnessing the fear? Who is watching the body age, the identity shift, the world change? That witness, that pure, silent, changeless awareness, that is who you are, and that is what cannot die. But don't take that as belief. Don't make it another idea to hold on to. Test it. Sit in silence. Watch your thoughts come and go. Watch emotions rise and pass. Notice how every sensation, every identity, every reaction arises, then fades. But you, the one who sees it, remain. You are not the content. You are the space. Not the form, but the formless. And once you recognize that, truly and directly, the fear of death begins to fall away, because death only threatens the temporary, and you are not temporary. The tragedy is that most people never discover this. They spend their lives defending an identity that is already dissolving. They trade eternal awareness for the comfort of a fragile self-image. They grasp at permanence in a world built on change, and so they suffer. They suffer not because life is cruel, but because they resist its nature. They want security in a reality designed to be fluid. They want control in a dance that only responds to surrender. But here is the grace. Every loss, every change, every little ego death is a rehearsal, a chance to see through the veil, a chance to wake up. When a relationship ends, when a dream falls apart, when the old self no longer fits, those are initiations, invitations to see that you are not who you thought you were, that there is something deeper, quieter, more enduring beneath the surface. And if you accept those invitations, if you allow the small deaths to open you, then when the great death arrives, it will not be a stranger. It will be a return, not to nothingness, but to wholeness, not to an end, but to the source. You will watch the identity fall away like autumn leaves. You will feel the dissolving not as terror, but as relief, because finally, you are free, free of the roles, free of the masks, free of the need to be anything at all. Just presence, just being, just light. And this is the great paradox. To die before you die is the only way to truly live, because when you stop clinging to who you think you are, you make space for what you really are to shine through. And what you are is not a name, not a voice, not a history, not even a soul in the way people imagine. You are reality knowing itself. You are awareness looking through your eyes. You are the mystery, remembering. So let go. Let the small self dissolve. Let the fear rise and pass. Let the truth break through the story. Because what waits on the other side is not death. It is life. Raw, luminous, sacred. And when the final breath comes, you will not shrink. You will not hide. You will not grasp. You will smile. Because you will know. You are not ending. You are going home. You were never meant to be just one life. You are not this body, this face, this particular string of memories. These are just costumes, worn by something much older. Something that has danced across centuries, forgotten names, dissolved identities, and yet carried within it one sacred thread, the longing to remember. That thread is your soul, and your soul doesn't walk a straight line. It spirals. It spirals through lifetimes, through bodies and cultures and genders and wounds. Each life a passage, each breath a lesson, each death a doorway. The journey of the soul is not a story of arrival. It is the unfolding of awareness across the vast theater of existence. We live in a world that fears endings. We cling to this life as if it were all we had, but deep inside you know, this isn't your first time here, and it won't be your last. The ancient teachings of Tibet don't ask whether you believe in rebirth. They assume you remember, not with your mind, but with your bones, with the sudden pull toward a stranger's face, with the grief that feels older than your childhood, with the passion that comes out of nowhere, with the wisdom that seems unearned. Rebirth is not a concept. It is an echo, a vibration moving through time, shaped by karma and guided by choice. But let's be clear, karma is not what most people think it is. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It's not a cosmic system of retribution. Karma is resonance. It is the momentum of intention. It is the residue of energy, clinging not to your name or history, but to your frequency. Every action, every word, every emotion, especially those charged with intensity, leave behind traces. These traces accumulate not in some external record, but within the subtle architecture of your being. Karma doesn't chase you down, it lives inside you. And when you die, you don't escape it. You become fully immersed in it. Because when the body dissolves and the mind begins to unravel, there is no more hiding. What is left is what you've cultivated, your clarity or your confusion, your peace or your turmoil. The Tibetan Book of the Dead calls this moment the beginning of the bardo, the in-between. Here, freed from form, your consciousness moves through realms shaped by your own karma. You face visions, lights, deities, shadows, not because they exist outside of you, but because they are reflections of your inner world. It is here, in this liminal space, that the journey of rebirth begins. Not through judgment, but through vibration. You are drawn, not forced, to your next life, attracted to the precise circumstances that will mirror what you still need to see, feel, heal, or complete. Your next body, family, culture, challenges, all are invitations. If you struggled with control, you may be born into chaos. If you clung to pride, you may return in humility. If you cultivated compassion, you may be placed where others need your light. Karma is not fair. It is precise. It does not care about your ego. It cares about your evolution. And yet, even this is not the full truth, because while karma sets the conditions, the soul still chooses. Not with logic, but with knowing. Before descending into form again, the soul glimpses the arc of its journey. It sees where it has been, what it has learned, what it still resists. And from that place, a place beyond fear, it says yes. Yes to this body. Yes to this family. Yes to this wound. Yes to this work. Because the soul is not trying to avoid pain. It is trying to wake up. And pain, when met with awareness, becomes a portal. That's the hidden grace of rebirth. It's not about returning endlessly. It's about remembering fully. But here's the tragedy. Most forget. At birth, the veil falls. We forget why we came. We forget what we chose. We forget that we are the ones who opened this chapter. And so we resist. We blame. We cling. We fear. We reenact old patterns, unconscious cycles, karmic loops, until something happens. A crack, a shock, a whisper. A book falls into your hands. A teacher appears. A dream unsettles you. A loss shatters your identity. And in that rupture, the remembering begins. You start asking deeper questions. You begin to feel the edge of something sacred. You sense that your suffering has meaning, that your wounds are not punishments, but invitations. You start to see the patterns, not just in your life but across lives. You recognize that the person who triggers you is echoing a story older than this relationship, that the illness you carry reflects an unresolved energy from long ago, that your gifts, your art, your insight, your fire, were forged in previous lifetimes. And with that recognition, something shifts. You stop being a victim. You stop begging the universe for mercy. You start listening. You realize that karma isn't happening to you. It's unfolding through you. And in that moment, you gain choice. You can still react. You can still fall asleep. But you can also pause. And in that pause, you can choose presence. You can choose forgiveness. You can choose love. This is how karma dissolves. Not through rituals, not through guilt, but through consciousness. When you meet a karmic pattern with awareness, it has no ground to stand on. It reveals itself, bows, and fades, because its purpose has been fulfilled. And the more you do this, the lighter you become, not emotionally, but energetically. The soul begins to carry less residue. The next rebirth is not weighted with confusion, but guided by clarity. Eventually, some souls choose not to return, not because they fear the world, but because their work in this realm is done. They dissolve into presence, into pure being. Others return, not for themselves, but for us. These are the bodhisattvas, the awakened, the guides in human form. They take birth not to learn, but to serve, to walk beside us, silently anchoring the light. But you don't have to wait for another life to begin this process. Every moment is a small death. Every act of presence is a rebirth. Every choice to respond instead of react breaks a karmic thread. You can live this life as if it were your last, not out of fear, but out of reverence. You can meet each challenge as a karmic mirror, each emotion as a doorway, each person as a teacher. You can start now, because the truth is, your soul is already remembering. That's why you're here. That's why you're listening. That's why something deep inside you is nodding. You've been here before, and now you are ready to walk differently. Not asleep but awake, not clinging but choosing, not fearing death but honoring life. This is the soul's journey. Not a ladder upward but a spiral inward, home to what you've always been. There is a moment in every seeker's journey where the outer world can no longer satisfy the inner hunger, not because the world has failed you, but because your soul has ripened. Something ancient within you stirs, demanding more than comfort, more than answers, more than belief. It demands truth, not relative truth, not a convenient truth, but a piercing awareness that cuts through illusion like a blade through smoke. This awareness is not gifted to you. It cannot be inherited, bought, or borrowed. It must be uncovered. It must be earned through presence. It is the reward for refusing to run from yourself one more time. Most people live their lives recycling patterns they do not see. They react to wounds they do not remember. They relive emotions that do not belong to the present moment. And because they never pause long enough to question the origin of these experiences, they become prisoners of their own unconscious momentum. This is the cycle. Not just the cycle of reincarnation after death, but the micro-reincarnations happening each day as we repeat the same storylines, the same habits, the same identities. The cycle is not just cosmic. It is intimate. It is in the way you speak to yourself when you are alone. It is in the people you attract, the situations you recreate, the fears you obey. To break this cycle is to interrupt the sleep of the soul, and this interruption is violent in the gentlest way. It begins when you can finally say, I am willing to see. I am willing to look at my life without flinching. I am willing to sit with everything I have suppressed, denied, or buried. I will no longer call my wounds personality, my fears logic, or my defenses wisdom. I will name things honestly. I will tell the truth. The Tibetan teachings speak of liberation not as something that happens after death, but as a state of clarity that can be cultivated now. Death only reveals who you are. But if you meet death while still alive, if you can become intimate with the parts of you that are dying every day, then you gain access to a freedom that death cannot threaten. Awareness is not the mind. It is not thought. It is not analysis. It is the space behind thought. It is the silence that notices the noise without becoming it. Awareness does not need to control, fix, or resolve anything. It simply sees, and in the act of truly seeing, the unconscious loses its power. When you witness a pattern instead of participating in it blindly, you are no longer its servant. You are the master returning to the throne of your own being. But this mastery is not domination. It is surrender, a surrender to presence, to truth, to the exact reality of the moment without embellishment or avoidance. This is why awareness is so feared, because once you are aware, you can no longer pretend. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot play small and call it humility. You cannot betray yourself and call it love. You cannot cling to the old narrative and call it fate. Liberation begins with this sacred discomfort, the unease that arises when you stop blaming the world and begin holding yourself accountable for your attention, your choices, your energy. This discomfort is not punishment. It is purification. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the soul moves through various realms, each reflecting the contents of its own consciousness. It is not judged by an external God, but by the projections of its own mind. What you see after death is what you cultivated in life. This is not metaphor. It is a precise law of energetic continuity. If you lived in fear, you enter fearful realms. If you clung to identity, you wander through realms of clinging. If you sought truth, you are drawn to realms of clarity. And if you awakened to your true nature while still alive, you are no longer bound to any realm. You become the space in which all realms arise and dissolve. This is not philosophy. It is practice. Daily, moment to moment, breath by breath, you become free by becoming present. You dissolve karma not by effort, but by insight. Karma does not persist because it is strong. It persists because it is unconscious. The light of awareness burns through it like sun through fog. But this light must be fierce and tender, fierce in its commitment to seeing what is real, tender in its refusal to shame or abandon what it finds. You must become both the surgeon and the healer, cutting through illusion with precision and holding the wound with love. This is how the cycle breaks, not through grand gestures or spiritual theatrics, but through the quiet, consistent willingness to return to yourself without judgment, to return again and again, no matter how many times you forget, fall, or flinch. And here is the paradox. The more you return to yourself, the more you realize there is no self to return to, only awareness, only spaciousness, only the ever-present witness in which all thoughts, emotions, and identities arise and fall like waves on an infinite ocean. You are not the waves. You are the ocean. You are not the roles. You are the actor waking up from the dream. And when the actor wakes up, the play loses its grip. Liberation is not the end of story. It is the end of identification with story. Life still happens. Emotions still arise. Pain still visits. But nothing sticks. Nothing binds. Because you are not caught in the web. You are the one watching the spider. This freedom is not cold or detached. It is alive. It is intimate. It loves deeper because it does not need. It listens clearer because it has nothing to prove. It gives without agenda. It receives without fear. And most of all, it remembers. It remembers that every soul is on this path, whether they know it or not. It remembers that judgment is blindness and compassion is sight. It remembers that every act of presence, no matter how small, helps to loosen the knots in the collective soul. So what does it mean to break the cycle? It means you stop waiting for death to wake up. It means you take the mirror life offers you and you look, truly look. It means you forgive what you thought was unforgivable, not because it was right, but because holding on is too expensive. It means you let go of identities you have outgrown, even if they kept you safe. It means you open the door to what is real and you stop pretending you do not hear the knock. It means you become still enough to hear your soul, and then you obey. Not blindly, not obediently, but reverently. You follow the thread of awareness like a pilgrim following light through a forest. And as you walk, the forest begins to clear, the echoes fade, the noise softens, and in the silence that remains, you remember the truth. You were never trapped. You were never broken. You only forgot. But now you remember, and in that remembrance the wheel slows, the illusion thins, the soul sighs, and the cycle ends, not in resistance, but in peace. There comes a moment in every seeker's path where the journey no longer feels like a search, but a remembering, a soft return to something ancient, something that was never lost, only forgotten beneath layers of distraction, fear, and conditioning. If you have arrived here, to the final words of this exploration, it is not by accident. Some part of you, perhaps long dormant, has been stirred awake, and that part recognizes something deeper than information. It recognizes truth, not the kind of truth that shouts, but the kind that resonates in the silence between thoughts, the kind that speaks not to the mind, but to the soul. We began this journey with a mysterious book, a sacred scroll from the Tibetan tradition that dares to speak with clarity about the most elusive question humanity has ever asked. What happens when we die? Not as theory, not as belief, but as a map of the soul's passage through 49 days of transition. Through bardos of light, sound, fear, illusion, and choice. Through realms where our consciousness is confronted not by gods, but by its own reflections. But what if this journey is not just about death? What if every day you live is a bardo? What if each moment of awakening, of heartbreak, of letting go is its own death and rebirth? The Tibetans knew this. That is why the book is not merely for the dying. It is for the living who dare to die before they die, to meet the truth of their being while breath still moves through their body. Because awareness is the bridge. Awareness is the liberation, not a grand awakening that comes once in a lifetime, but the subtle practice of noticing how we cling, how we numb, how we avoid, and then choosing, gently, courageously, to stay, to be with what is, without needing it to change, to allow the wave to rise and fall, without drowning in it, to see the fear and meet it with breath, to see the craving and meet it with stillness, to see the mask and meet it with truth. This is the real death. The death of illusion, the death of egoic identity, the death of the false self we constructed to survive, to belong, to feel worthy. And though this death is terrifying, it is the doorway to life. True life, life that is not bound by the past or by fear of the future, life that arises fresh in each breath, anchored in presence, free from story. And yet this path is not easy. It is not glamorous. It will ask everything of you. It will strip you bare. It will bring you to your knees. You will have to face everything you avoided. You will be asked to love parts of yourself you were taught to hate. You will be asked to forgive what feels unforgivable. You will be asked to open, even when it feels safer to shut down. But here is the grace. On the other side of that surrender, there is a freedom the world cannot give you. A freedom that is not conditional, not dependent, not transactional. A freedom that comes from knowing who you are beyond identity, beyond belief, beyond name and form. And when you know this, not intellectually but through lived experience, everything changes. Death loses its grip, fear loses its fuel, time loses its tyranny. You begin to live from a place of stillness, of clarity, of deep knowing. You become a quiet revolutionary in a world that runs on noise. The teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead are not just ancient, they are eternal. They remind us that life and death are not opposites. They are partners in the same dance. They are doors opening into one another. And the key to navigating both is not more knowledge, but more presence. You do not need to know all the answers. You do not need to have it all figured out. You only need to wake up. And then wake up again and again. Because every moment is a gate. Every breath is a portal. Every silence is a chance to return. So what now? Now you take this remembering into your life. Not as a performance, not as a new identity, but as a quiet, steady flame. You become more honest, more present, more kind, not because it makes you spiritual, but because it makes you real. You listen more than you speak. You hold space without needing to fix. You walk slowly through the world, seeing it not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be met. And when fear comes, as it will, You do not run. You bow to it. You greet it as a teacher. You ask, "What are you showing me that I have not yet seen?" And in that asking, the fear softens. The illusion fades. The soul breathes. Because you are not here to transcend your humanity. You are here to embody your divinity through your humanity. To bring awareness into the mess, the pain, the joy, the boredom, the beauty. To walk through the bardos not as a victim of fate, but as a participant in your own liberation. This is the revolution, not external, but internal. And when enough of us commit to it, not in theory but in practice, the world shifts, not overnight, but inevitably. And so if this journey has touched you, if it has awakened something dormant or confirmed something you have always known, then let it be the beginning, not the end. Let this be the invitation to dive deeper, to explore the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of everyday life, to question not only what happens after death, but what it truly means to be alive. There are other videos on this channel that can guide you further into these mysteries, into the hermetic laws, the hidden codes of the soul, the ancient teachings that echo across time. So if you feel the pull, follow it. Your soul knows the way. And if you found value in this journey, please consider supporting this space by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment below sharing your reflections. Your presence here helps others find their way too. Every like, every share, every word, it matters. It creates ripples in the unseen. And if you're ready for the next step, watch the next video now. Let this remembering continue. Let the fire grow. Let the silence deepen. Thank you for being here, for walking this path, for remembering. See you in the next video.